16-year-old Timothy Jack McCoy spent Christmas 1971 at his aunt and uncle's home in Michigan. After some quality time surrounded by his cousins, ringing in the new year with them, he left on January 2, 1972, planning to jump on a bus at the local Greyhound station, back to his dad's house in Nebraska. In the early hours of January 3, Timothy had made it to Chicago. It's cold, and Timothy's waiting for his connecting bus, which won't arrive for another 12 hours or so. He's just wandering around killing time when a man pulls up to the curb and offers him a scenic tour of the city to fill in the layover. When Timothy says he's hungry, the man offers to take him back to his place for food. He would never leave. 14 years later, Timothy's family would finally receive the phone call they'd been waiting for. Police finally knew what had happened to him, but their relief would be short-lived when they found out that Timothy had fallen victim to the killer clown. I'm Claire Murphy, and this is True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. While he was victim number one, Timothy's story is shared in episode 6 of the new binge series The Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. The story follows a 1978 arrest of Gacy after investigating the disappearance of another young boy. Under the floorboards of Gacy's home, buried in the crawl space, were the bodies of 26 boys and young men. 3 more would be found buried in the backyard. One of them was known unofficially as Greyhound Busboy. That's how Gacy referred to him. Officially, he was body 9, with 8 bodies having been pulled from the dirt below Gacy's home before him. It wouldn't be until 1986 that body number 9 would be formally identified through dental records as Timothy McCoy. In episode 2, we meet Johnny Sick. He disappeared in January 1977. Police are unsure what led him to come into contact with Gacy, but they found his high school ring in Gacy's home. Episode 3, we meet Samuel Stapleton and Randy Reffett. Samuel's one of Gacy's youngest victims. Randall went missing just a day after Samuel. His identity was confirmed from X-rays on Christmas Day, 3 years after he went missing. In episode 4, we meet Billy Kindred and Greg Godzik. Greg worked for Gacy. He left for a date with his girlfriend in December 1976, but never returned home. In episode 5, we meet Billy Carroll, Dale Landigan, and Robert Donnelly, one of Gacy's 7 known survivors. Robert Donnelly survived John Wayne Gacy, but he's not sure why. The then 19-year-old was waiting at a bus stop when Gacy pulled up in a black car, claiming to be a police officer. He asked to see his ID, and as he stepped closer to show it, Gacy pulled a gun on him and ordered him to get in the car, where he handcuffed him. Robert was sexually assaulted several times in Gacy's home before he was told that he was about to take his last ride, Gacy asking him how it felt knowing he was about to die. But instead, Gacy let him go, telling Robert that no one would believe him if he told anyone about it. And he was right. Police did take Gacy in for questioning. However, he claimed it was all consensual, describing the encounter as a game of sexual slavery, saying Robert probably reported him because he didn't pay him for it. Prosecutors declined to pursue the case. This wouldn't be the first or even the last time Gacy was questioned by police only to be let go. In episode 6, we meet Timothy, who we revealed as Gacy's first victim, John Butkovich and Robert Peast. In episode 7, we meet Jeff Riggle. Jeff, who was in a happy throuple relationship with his boyfriend and girlfriend, came across Gacy while walking to a gay bar in March 1978. Gacy offered him a ride and a joint to lure him into his car and out of the cold, then used a rag soaked in chloroform to drug him into submission. Jeff woke up in Gacy's house, tied to a torture device made of a wooden board and chains, and naked Gacy standing in front of him. He was then subjected to hours of rape and torture and physical assault. He also claims there was another man present at some stage who also took part. He passed out again and awoke under the statue of Alexander Hamilton in Chicago's Lincoln Park. He told police everything, but they didn't believe him. He took on the investigation himself and eventually found Gacy, taking his details to investigators. They were slow to act. And so when Rob Peast went missing in December 1978, Jeff's battery accusation against Gacy had been filed, but he was allowed to remain free. When Gacy was finally arrested and the bodies found in his home, the reporting of Jeff's story motivated many young men to come forward, who all shared similar stories. Devil in Disguise brings just a handful of Gacy's 33 victim stories to light, and the shortfall in justice they each were handed. As the director, it was Patrick McManus's job to do these stories justice, and the way in which he chose to tell them was the reason he finally said yes to the project at all. He joins us now. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your insights on the creation of your TV series, The Devil in Disguise. Welcome to True Crime Conversations.
Thank you so very, very much for having me. I appreciate you taking the time.
I guess we need to start off by asking you what allowed you eventually to say yes to this story, because I understand you knocked back making this series previously. So what changed for you in order for you to turn that into a yes?
Yeah, I mean, you've done your research. I said no twice because I just didn't understand what worth it was going to be to do a serial killer show, quite frankly. And it wasn't until I sort of stumbled on this idea of telling the victim stories that I realized that there was a way into telling this differently. And it was way early in the process because I had turned it down, as I said, a couple of times. And when they came back the third time, they basically said, and these are partners of mine, I've known them for years and years and years, both at Universal Content and at Peacock. And they were just like, what would it take? And I said, well, if I focus it not on Gacy, and in all honesty, I thought they were going to say no. Like, I thought they were going to be like, sorry, we'll now move on. We've asked you 3 times. And when they said yes, I honestly thought they were just shining me on and telling me what I wanted to hear. And then they were going to like pull the rug later, and they never did. But I will say that I had this like abstract idea of focusing on the victims' families, the police, the lawyers, but I didn't really understand how it worked until we came up with this idea in the writer's room of we called them short stories, where we would tell these stories that were completely taken away from Gacy at all. And that, I keep saying it sort of fell into perfect clarity and like what the show was, what the North Star of the show was. And it's weird for me to say this, that it suddenly sort of became easy to break, to figure it out. So number one, whatever like sort of little spark we got in the room to figure that out, I'm very grateful for. Number two, I'm very grateful to the studio and the network for taking the chance on it and letting us explore it, because it was a swing.
Well, can we talk about that decision? Because, I mean, in making anything about John Wayne Gacy, you have endless amounts of research material. There's the tapes that he, openly admitted to what he was doing to his legal team. There are documentaries. There is the interview he did before his execution from prison. Like, there is books. There are there's so much that you could lean on for his story. But in choosing to focus more on the victims, that would have been more difficult because their stories, and especially because Gacy chose his victims for a reason. A lot of them were from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. They were, from the LGBTQ community, like people whose lives were not publicly available at the time. So how did you piece their stories together like this?
Well, I mean, you sort of landed on it. I mean, we did an immense amount of research, and that really is always the first step in all of the shows that I've done outside of Happy and Homecoming, which didn't need it, but going back to Marco Polo, which was the first show that I ran. Like, I deeply, deeply believe in research. And so not only did we have the NBC News team, which did the documentary, which was spectacular. So we had a ton of research that was both in the documentary and out of the documentary. That's part one. Part two was, as you said, there are tons of books that we were able to draw from as well, that did begin to paint a picture of the victims. Number three, we had depositions and we had court testimony. I mean, like, I'll use even as, in the Randy Reffett, Samuel Stapleton story, right? That it was very famous that he had this bracelet that he had welded onto his wrist. And we sort of got the inspiration from that, very much from the fact that his mother broke down on the stand and couldn't carry on. They had to pause the proceedings. And so we then also had we have an amazing researcher that I've worked with on multiple shows named Patrick Murphy. he did a deep dive into whatever he could find on the record and about each of the victims, up to and including he went to Chicago and he actually went to the room that to this day holds all of the Gacy files and dug through that and gave us a very deep dive of everything that was in there. So we downloaded quite a bit of information to be able to try to build these stories. And at the end of the day, a lot of it was, as always, inspired by, right? Like we're not able to it isn't a documentary. And so we were dramatizing within the body of it. And the hope is that when people are watching it, they realize that we're not going to get it all right, but that we're trying to get the spirit of the story and the spirit of their story as right as we possibly could.
I understand that you did reach out to surviving members of the victims' families as you were going through this process of creating this series. That must be an incredibly difficult thing to do. And secondly, what do you do if they say, I don't want you to do this?
It's a really good question. Well, part one to your question is, I don't want to undersell or it didn't feel difficult to do because it genuinely felt like the right thing to do. And it's interesting, like early on when we were discussing the reaching out to the family members and our team at Universal were gathering whatever their last known contact information was of their next of kin. And quite frankly, we didn't get a ton back. Like we'd sent out 30 letters and emails and I made phone calls, and we did reach out to every last contact that they had. And we only heard back from a handful of people. But in that time where they were gathering the contact information, they were saying to me, they're like, that it's very probable that they're going to be upset at you. And I said, that's the point. Like the point is to open a dialogue. And while we were going to make the show, and I was absolutely going to open myself up to any criticism or any perspective that was going to come back my way. If someone said to me, I definitely don't want you to focus on my family member, we would have adjusted. And we did it early on in the process so that anyone that we did touch base with had the opportunity to say that to us. But we weren't necessarily asking for permission. I was opening up a dialogue so they at least knew that they could have a dialogue with us. And to me, I think that's important. And I'll go on the record as saying that I've said it before and I'll say it again and I'll keep saying it. I know that we've probably disappointed people. Like I am aware of that. And I don't know if there is any way to work around it, right? But I desperately want anyone who is listening to hear me when I say that what I said before, that we were trying to tell the story as best as we could. We were trying to tell the story with as much respect as we could. And for anybody that we may have disappointed, I am immensely sorry. That's never my intent. And what I am proud of so far is that people seem to be getting it. Like I don't know if the family members are, but like for the first time in my career, people are really getting what we were trying to do. And that I'm so proud of our writers first and our directors and our actors, because everyone went in with a very open heart and a desire to get this as right as possible.
Whose story did you tell first when you were making it?
In terms of the victims?
Yeah.
It was Johnny Sick. And that was very purposeful because in the pilot, I had written in his high school ring without knowing who it was. And so we knew that, which was real. They found that in Gacy's attic. And so we knew that episode 2 was going to be focused on Tovar going on that journey to identifying the owner of the ring. It was not Johnny's story was not told because of any other reason other than it made the most sense in that arc of storytelling between those 2 episodes. But I will say that I always knew, even when I was alone and I was pitching to the network, like what it was going to look like before we had the green light, I knew that Jeffrey Riggle was going to be the last story. Always was going to be the last story.
We're talking about Johnny Sick. part of his story and a part of so many of the stories of these victims is that they are young gay men who are in the 1970s, not openly gay. Johnny has to kind of hide it by having a very close girlfriend who are kind of led to believe that she is his girlfriend, even though she is herself not straight.
Correct.
But you're telling a lot of stories about the LGBTQ community. How do you consult with people in trying to tell those stories in a way that is sensitive to the fact that in the 1970s, it was a very different climate for people in that community, but also understanding you're playing this to a 2025 audience?
Yeah. So the first answer is yes, absolutely. Again, when I was all alone, and I knew what we were, because I'll fully confess that when I came into the story, I only knew all of like the surface little trivias about John Wayne Gacy, right? I knew that he was the clown killer. I knew that he was a contractor. I knew that he posed with Rosalind Carter, and like I knew like all of these surface level things. And I knew that he abducted and tortured and raped and murdered these young boys and young men, but I didn't fully understand the degree to which homophobia played a part in him getting away with it. So once I had stumbled on that piece of information as I was writing the pilot, I knew that I had to reach out, and I reached out to GLAAD immediately. Because what I was most afraid of was that I was somehow going to equate psychopathy with queerness. And that was something that I could not let happen. Because look, at the end of the day, I only know what I am a white, middle-aged, heterosexual man. And I will say that while I believe the old adage that a writer can write anything, I don't necessarily believe that a writer knows everything, nor should they write everything. And so they were very generous to us. They not only with me, then they came into the writer's room and they helped us from the outline stage through the script stage. And one of the rules that we came to together and that they were encouraging was don't approach this through a 2025 lens. You have to approach it through the 1970s. But the one thing that is so ignorant of me, and I will readily admit that. So the writers in the room, these are writers I've worked with, some of them for almost 15 years, 10 years, 8 years. The staff writer was a new writer to me. But by happenstance, they were queer. The majority queer, not everybody, but the majority queer. And so the room became this story ground of our writers who were finding their identities in very modern times and were struggling with the exact same challenges. And so what became apparent to me, and when I'm asked what do you want people to take away from this series, is that this is as relevant today as it was in the 1970s. And I would go on the record as saying that I actually believe that it is more relevant today. I believe that the level of hatred and prejudice and bias that we are seeing today that is leading to record numbers of violence across the spectrum, but especially to underrepresented voices, the LGBTQ community especially, that the idea in any viewer's mind that those problems have been solved, all you have to do is sort of look at the world around us and know that they haven't. So it became a very powerful journey in the writer's room to listen to these people that I've known for years express the same challenges and prejudices and biases that we were exploring in the stories in the 1970s.
You do tell the majority of these stories from the victims' perspectives, but as something you touched on there about how much homophobia played a role in how much John Wayne Gacy got away with, you also tell the story of law enforcement amongst this too, and not just the team who are investigating Gacy himself after he kills his final victim, but for those officers who've investigated him in the past and just how difficult the families of those victims found it when they came up against, police officers who just told them their sons were runaways, or that, it didn't matter because they were sex workers, or that they were gay and they lived certain lifestyles. And so if they disappeared, I guess they didn't matter as much as the next person. Do you feel like you'll get blowback from law enforcement for kind of exposing that storyline amongst this as well?
I think that if we do, then it is a very narrow interpretation of what we were doing in the show. And I'll expand on that in a second. And if it is that narrow interpretation of what we're doing in the show, then I would ask that the royal they to go back and rewatch, because I don't believe, I know that what we were presenting is a reality of the time and a reality of the system. And the idea that it can be denied then as much as it can be denied today is just fantasy, right? It is a complete and utter reinterpretation of what actually happened. So putting that into a box, right? And let's pretend that I have to defend that interpretation, and right, I will then pivot and I will bring up what you just brought up at the top of your question, which is, yes, we are pointing out the systemic failure of certain segments of the police force, not only about blatant prejudices, but also communication failures, right? Which are obvious because the system changed quite a bit after the Gacy case. But on the flip side, we're also showing officers who were in that pit for months on end, who were digging with their bare hands, who could not voice at the time the concept of PTSD, but who absolutely came out of that experience with PTSD. Police officers who quit the force, who lost marriages, who turned to alcohol and drugs because of the things that they saw down there. But they were down there every single day trying to find and identify every last person that was buried underneath Gacy's house. So the concept that we're somehow demonizing police is absolutely too narrow of an interpretation of the reality, because we are showing heroes on the one end and a complete systemic failure on the other. And I stand by that. And I will say that I hope that people who interpret it any other way will go back and just look a little bit more closely of what we're trying to say in the show.
So you said before you knew some surface level stuff about Gacy going into this. Were you as shocked as I was? Because I think I was the same as you. I knew some stuff about him, but I didn't know the depths of things. Yeah. When you did see how many times Gacy had been in contact with police, I mean, he went to jail for 18 months over the molestation of a young boy and then was released, is supposed to serve a 10-year sentence, released after 18 months, and then goes on to have other very suspicious things, allegations leveled against him by other young men. And that's kind of, it's a he said situation, and it's kind of let go. Like, were you shocked by how many times Gacy could have been stopped and wasn't?
Unbelievably so. I mean, I don't want to, give too simple or too quick of an answer, but it's overwhelming. I mean, it gets me every time. The simple bit of disturbing, morbid, horrible trivia that is true, and I remember the moment in the writer's room when we found it out in the research, that had Gacy simply done his time for the first sodomy charge where he went to jail in 1968, he would have gotten out on the exact same day and year that Rob Peast was abducted and murdered, which we talk about in the show. The concept that had he just done his time, none of those boys would have died at his hands is insane. And then you go into all of the moments when the police knocked on his door, all of the moments when the police chased him, all of the moments followed him, all the moments when family members went to the police, The kicker being the one that I talked about earlier, which is the Jeffrey Riggle case, which is where he was abducted, chloroformed, raped, tortured, dumped back on the street. Police did nothing. He did everything, found his house, staked him out, found his house, brought it to the police, and they still did nothing. And Gacy went on to kill 4 more young men, including Rob Peast, after that. It's unconscionable. Like it's impossible to wrap your brain around that.
I want to ask you if that's true too. When Riggle took a piece of Gacy's mail to police and said, "That's the guy, that's his address," that the officer said, "Do you know that stealing mail is a crime, criminal offense?" Did that actually happen, or was that dramatization?
That was dramatized. However, the fact that they got his license plate, his home address, and brought it, and the police said to him that there's nothing we can do, it's out of our jurisdiction, that's true.
What victim, after telling so many of these stories now, and I'm not saying that any are going to stand out any more than the others, because each of their stories by themselves are so terrible and sad, but was there any one of the victims' stories that really hit you hard? I mean, they all would have, I guess. I don't know what I'm asking exactly, but is there one that stands out for you that you can't stop thinking about?
So, no, I want to say no, but I'm going to answer the question in a different way. All of the stories were sort of overwhelming in various ways. The story that gets me the most, and it's not an individual story, it's just sort of a blanket of what happened at the time, was that when they first started breaking the case, and the police were setting up hotlines, and they were asking the public all over, not just the city or the state or the country, but the world, if you were missing anyone in the Chicago area, and the number of calls it was like a tsunami of calls. Like they were getting pings from all over the place. And the second that the press made it out to be that Gacy was queer and the victims were queer, it dried up. And that always just stuck with me. I mean, look, I hate I don't want to be ignorant about it, because I'm not, but it's just so abhorrent to me that relatives of victims would not want the memory of their son or brother or friend to be tainted by homosexuality. That's really hard to fathom for me. So
that's the thing too, isn't it? Because whilst we know of 33 of Gacy's victims, many of whom were buried under his house, some in his yard, some dumped in a river, that there are still at least 5 unidentified at this point in time. And they are still identifying the victims even now. I think the most recent was 2021, 2022. DNA recent. Obviously is playing a role now, and they have exhumed bodies and done further DNA testing, but there are still victims now that remain unidentified. Yeah. How does that sit with you?
I mean, I will share, because he's not here, Michael Chernus, who plays Gacy, he and I have done a lot of press separate and together. And he says, like, the thing that he wants people to take out of the show, like if he could accomplish anything with the show, it's that people would come forward and somehow, because of our show and the other reporting, not just our show, but like, there are a lot of people who have really tried to get this story out there for this exact same reason, that we might be able to identify one more young man. And so I see it as sort of like a call to action, and that I feel like the more successful our show is, the more successful the documentaries are, the more successful the books are, the more of an opportunity we have to bring one more boy home. And that to me is sort of empowering. In many ways, it's we do these social action campaigns alongside our shows, all of our shows, and our current social action campaign for Devil in Disguise is called Regarding Youth, and it is about trying to give people not just the education, but the tools in order to try to better protect youth who are at risk at home, at school, and communities. And so I feel like this is another opportunity for people to do something, and to begin to look into your family's past and see if there is some story that you have heard about or know about, or that might have some connective tissue to these young boys. I would love nothing more than to bring another one home, to be party to it, not to do it on our own, but to be party to it.
You mentioned Michael Chernus there, who does play Gacy in your series. How do you work with someone to recreate someone who is so essentially evil? And I mean, you do take us through the process of him speaking to, the therapist and being psychoanalyzed and getting a better understanding as to what kind of mental state this man was in to have done the things that he has done. Not saying that anyone who suffers from any of those, things will go on to do what he did. But in order to play someone like that, and I don't know, he said in other interviews that he watched some of those interviews and listened to the tapes to get an understanding of how he moved and what he sounded like, but to exist in that character for a while. And you and I spoke just before we hit go on this interview that I've been sitting in the law of, Gacy for the past few days in preparation for this interview. You've sat in this law for years now. If you made this and now you're talking about it again, for him, he had to embody this evilness. Yeah. How do you work with someone to make sure that they can safely navigate that?
Well, Michael, first of all, was partner from the beginning. I mean, like I sold the show, and I went out looking for the person to play Gacy, and it became very apparent very quickly that if Michael Chernus was going to say yes, that he was the one. And then he became a partner. I mean, we were in the writers' room still for months, and one of the challenges, first of all, for I think both the writers and for Michael, was how is this person real? And I'll get to the second part of your question in a second, but when I wrote the first episode, even I was struggling with how this guy, the way he talks, how he talks, like what he's saying is so not what you expect out of a quote unquote serial killer, that it seems fake. And that if you had written it on your own and it was a pure piece of fiction, people would call bullshit on you. And then when Michael and I then the writers came in, and the writers called bullshit on me. They were like, they read the script, and these are writers again that I've known forever, and they were like, Patrick, come on, man, give me a break. What are we supposed to do with this? And I said, just do me a favor and go off and do some research and then come back to me. And they did that, and they came back and they were like, oh shit, okay, how do we write this fucking guy, right? Mm-hmm. He's a whole other thing. And then we're in it with Chernus, and Chernus was bristling at it, right? Not in a bad way, but in the same way we had it, right? Where we're like, how do we deal, right? And I said to him, and he talks about this, that Michael, if you don't approach it from this perspective, which is the real perspective, which is this guy was affable, charming, he was the charming in quotes because he was a goofball, really, right? Then it's sort of a disservice to the victims. Because then you're if you're not doing it, you're like, why do you get in the car? Why do you want a job? Why are you going home with this guy? Right? But so that was challenge number one, was just getting everyone on the same page of who Gacy really was. And then as it relates to just sort of the psychology of taking, I don't know if the question you're getting at is how do you take care of an actor who has to deal with this? I will say, speaking for Chernus, because I've heard him say this quite a bit, number one, he talks quite a bit about how as an actor, and he's Juilliard trained, he's a really well-trained actor. He's you're supposed to figure out all the ways in which you connect and excuse someone, right? You're this person. And he said doing this role, he had to throw all that training out because he's I will never be able to accept this person. I can't do it. He's I can do it to a point, and then I get to the next point, which is him murdering and raping and torturing. I'm I can't find a way to excuse that. And we can talk about that next. We talk about that quite a bit, that you can't excuse it. And you said right there that someone with mental health issues are not going to go on to do this thing. There's no way of explaining this guy away other than the fact that he is pure, unadulterated, singular evil, right? There's no struggle with identity. There's no struggle with dads and alcoholic dads. There's no struggle with mental health, right? That excuses this away. So Chernus, in terms of taking care of himself, I know that he talks about how, and I saw it because I was in his trailer quite a bit. He had a list of all of the names of the victims on a board, on like a fold out tri board. And while he never did it in front of me, he talks quite a bit about how he would get done with his day and he would go and he would just read the names. And his point was, we're doing it for them. Like, this is not about Gacy, this is about them. And so that's why I'm doing it. And I thought that was a very interesting way of protecting himself.
I think that's interesting what you say about Gacy, is that he is a very difficult character to wrap your head around, in that he seems quite charming in a very fun, dad jokey kind of way. And his ability to lure people into that, and he talked himself up quite a bit, and, you know, he was an important person and people believed that, and they believed that he would give them a job and pay them lots of money. And so there was lots of ways that he lured people in. But do you feel like, it, from your surface level understanding of who he was at the beginning of all of this, do you feel like you at all could get a handle or an understanding of the person John Wayne Gacy, who he actually is? Because I don't think anyone truly understands the motivations for the things that he did. But was there a moment that you thought, this is who this guy really is?
I know this is a podcast, so I shouldn't take such a long breath or thought. It's such a, you know, it's amazing. I've been doing press for this for like more than a month, and I've been talking about it for 3 years, and no one's ever asked me this question. I guess I'm going to have to go back to a version of what I just said, which is, I don't think there was any world in which myself and the writers and Chernus could have read more, studied more, dissected more. I don't know how we could have done more. And I don't think that I can say, yes, that I know who John Wayne Gacy is. Because and I'm stealing a little bit from Chernus on this, but I think that I know a lot of people who struggled with their identity. And I think that I know a lot of people who struggled with abusive parents and struggled with alcoholism and drug addiction, as Gacy did. And I think that I've known people, I know very personally people who have struggled with their mental health in my family. And this is where I'm stealing from Chernus. I think you can understand Gacy only to that far, and then you can't make the next step. And so I have to attribute that answer to Michael, because I think it's like the most universal way of looking at it, which is that you can understand him only to a point, but you will never fully understand. And I think that you then go to the most base answer, which is, and the most simpleton answer, which is that he was just evil. Like, and how do you explain evil, right?
When you're deciding what parts of Gacy's life to include in this story and what not, how do you then decide what to discard? Because I understand you shot a fair amount more footage, say, in the final episode, which takes us to Gacy's execution, which we will never see because you cut all of it. How do you decide to say, you know what, this is a really important part of Gacy's story, the fact that he did receive the death penalty and he was eventually executed?
Yeah.
But yet you see him very briefly in this final episode, where it should all be about him. It is his death finally, but you choose to make it not about him. How do you come to that point?
So first of all, there is a part of me, not for a while, I want there to be some space, because I'll get to the answer, and this will go to why I want space. But there is a very large part of me that someday I want to release the original cut of it, because I will say that Michael did an extraordinary performance, and he was in half of it. I mean, I feel really bad for the studio and the network, and especially my line producer, because we spent a lot of money that did not end up on screen, a lot. And Michael's performance is spectacular. So I directed for the first time, and I directed the finale. And I was in post on it, and I remember it really, really clearly. It was a Sunday morning. I woke up early. My wife and I on Saturdays and Sundays trade off bringing each other coffee in bed. And Ioli, my wife, who runs our social action and our philanthropy for the company, came upstairs with my coffee, and she looked at my face and she's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, I think I have to cut Chernus out of the finale. And I just like I had woken up. I always wake up early. I barely sleep, as you can probably tell with my eyes. I woke up super early with just this like flash that it was the last chance I had to like make the statement that it was not about Gacy. And because I feel like, and I can say like the scenes were really powerful with Chernus, that I don't think that there was any world in which an audience wasn't going to come away with some semblance of weirdly feeling for him. Like weirdly, like it wouldn't, you're not going to be on his side. You're going to want him to die. But there was enough in there that there would be something. And even if you didn't, right? Like even if I was guaranteed to have you have nothing but antipathy for him, there was a world in which, you know, we were still going to be focusing on him for 35 minutes of the finale. And so I asked my editor, Ryan Denmark, who we've worked together for years, I was like, can you tomorrow cut me and cut without Chernus in it? And he's like, what? And I said, just do it and let's see how it went. And so he did it the next day. And at noon, lunch, we watched it down together on Zoom. And we got to the end and I just said, what do you think? And he goes, yep, this is what it is. And by the way, Denmark, I mean this with nothing but love because I'll never work without him, is a big asshole. Like he would tell me, he would 100% tell me if I was wrong. Like he is not, like that's why I love him, is that he'll tell me that I suck all the time. And then the question was, how do I tell Chernus? And it took me a long time to tell Chernus, uncomfortably long time, because I wanted to fly to New York and watch it down with him, and I couldn't make it happen. And then I had to eventually break down and tell him. And I got to tell you, I know he will say that he took it hard at first. Like he says, he's like the ego, the actor ego, right? But he was very professional about it. He went off and he watched it and he came back and he said he got it too. And I will say, I think it's really good because he's not in it.
I'd love to know if you've gotten any feedback on dramatizing true crime, because we did speak to the author of the book on Ed Gein after Ryan Murphy made Monsters about Ed Gein. And he was concerned that people had the wrong impression as to who Ed Gein actually was due to the dramatization of his life in that story. Have you had feedback about, you know, people concerned that dramatizing any of this story was the wrong thing to do, or maybe you've had the opposite?
Both. Honestly, both. I mean, as I expressed a little while ago, like I know that I'm going to disappoint people, and there's absolutely not a question that we've received people who said, well, that is not right, that is not accurate. You know, I don't think it's been, I can tell you that it's not at the same level as what some of the pushback has been on other series. I will say overwhelmingly, it's been positive. And again, like, look, there are whole scenes in the show in which we lifted dialogue from depositions or from interviews, and we like made that the dialogue.
We can also see that too when sometimes you run a storyline and then you've played the actual footage of the exact thing that is said in that episode. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, absolutely, the preponderance of the dialogue is fictional, right? Like we're operating under and inspired by dramatization, and there's no way we could have been in these conversations, right? So but I will say again, like wherever we faltered, and I want to put that in quotes, I will say that it was absolutely inspired by a desire to get the spirit of all of the research right, and the places where we overstepped quote unquote bounds of what was real and dramatized, it still all came from a place of us studying this character and this character, and maybe these two characters were never in the same room together, right? but they were sharing an experience that was real, and that was what we were trying to get at. So I am in no way, shape, or form casting any aspersions on other shows. You mentioned Ed Gein. I stand by what I've said a million times, and I will say for the rest of my career, which is that art is subjective and is there for a reason, and it is going to be judged both positively or critiqued both positively and negatively, and that's just art, right? I will say, I can tell you that every moment of every day in the writer's room, and then on in prep, and then in production, was in a desire to get it as right as we could possibly get it, even if what we're saying is that it's a spiritual rightness. And I know that phrase is probably loaded and probably is going to upset people who don't think that we should do this in any way. But I can tell you that I feel very proud that we did something that was super respectful as we could possibly do one of these things. And I'll always try to get it better the next time. Like, I'll always continue to try to evolve this process as long as I am doing it, so that at the end of the day, I hope that people can look at what we've done in Dr. Death, in Girl from Plainville, in this show, and say we tried to not be salacious. We tried to not be gratuitous. We tried to not glorify. We really did try to honor the memory of these stories as best as we possibly could.
Well, the fact that you did not show the deaths of a single one of them, or the lead up to their deaths, that felt very respectful. No violence was shown throughout this entire series, and you'd think a story about a serial killer, that would be the main focus. That must have been a very deliberate choice.
Oh yeah, that was the one red line that we refused to cross. And I will say really quickly, because I know we're running out of time, but that was both out of respect, but also it was strategic. I mean, I will say that I learned a real valuable lesson in Dr. Death when we didn't show any surgeries until the finale. And I was blown away by the number of people who have come up to me over the years and said those surgeries were so grotesque. And I was like, you never saw anything? And they said, of course we did. And I said, go back, you never saw anything. Not until the finale, you see it in the finale. But it was all imagination, sound, design, imagination. And when we made the decision out of respect to not show the murders, we also knew strategically that people were going to still find it extraordinarily, they were going to have a visceral experience, because you didn't need to see it to feel it, and you didn't need to see it to imagine it. And the more that you got to know the people around the moment of their death, the more visceral of an experience it was going to end up being. And that is not me trying to take advantage of those feelings. That is me just simply saying that is the human reaction, is that your imagination is extraordinarily powerful and you don't need to show it. I also will say that I know that we disappointed people who wanted to see it. Like, I'm readily aware of the fact that we are, there are people who probably find our show boring out there. And that's, again, the subjectivity of art, right? Like, for some people it works, for other people it doesn't work. And I stand by what we did, because I think it was ultimately the right way to do it.